had always enjoyed hunting. As a boy, I prowled the woods and fields near my home, turning over rocks and logs, examining the damp earth and moss in search of snakes, lizards, or land crabs. My parents didn't understand my fascination with these cold-blooded critters, but I loved learning about them, catching them to observe them, and then releasing them back into nature. As I became an adult, the hunting continued, just in a different form. Now I seek out old guns, hunting for hidden treasures in dusty antique stores, abandoned yard sales, and dilapidated old barns filled to the brim with junk accumulated over generations. It's the same high searching, finding, learning about history, adding unique finds to the collection. I'm an IT consultant by profession, but my hobby of buying and selling antiques brings in a nice side income. My wife Karen tolerates my weekly forays, knowing that I often return excited to show her a new acquisition. She has always been supportive of me. We met in college over 20 years ago. I was a senior preparing to get my engineering degree, and Karen was a sophomore majoring in business. We immediately hit it off over late-night coffee shop conversations about hopes, dreams, and fears for the future. I soon realized I wanted to marry her. Karen is organized and sensible. She knows how to manage her bills and budget wisely without complaining about fate. Shortly after we married, she found a good job as an accountant for a reputable regional company. We bought a small house and lived a normal life. We had no children, but we were happy. Our marriage was based on trust, friendship, and fidelity. At least, that's what I thought, until Marcus Wolf came into our lives. The first inkling of trouble to come came about 6 months ago during a casual dinner conversation. Karen had mentioned that she had a new director of operations at work, this same Marcus Wolf. She spoke of him in the best possible terms, which set off a faint alarm bell. In my experience, married middle-aged women are usually not so quick to fall in love with a new male boss unless there is an emotional or sexual attraction. When I gently voiced this concern, Karen erupted in anger. I was completely taken aback by her overreaction. My deliberate warning shot across the nose, instead struck a nerve. Karen clearly had strong feelings for Wolf, although she denied any undue interest. For the time being, I let the matter drop. But now my antenna was tuned to Wolf. I began to pay closer attention when Karen mentioned him, which was increasingly often. She extolled his leadership and business acumen, how he energizes the department, his big plans for expansion, reorganization, and new initiatives. How lucky they were to have him. The way she looked when she talked about him convinced me that my first suspicions were correct. Karen was in love, despite her denials. I was afraid confrontation would only push her away more, so I held my tongue. But the trust and easy affection that had been the hallmarks of our marriage were now strained. Karen had become more aloof, our conversations superficial, and our sex life virtually non-existent. My weekly antique shopping trips became an escape where I could clear my mind. One Saturday, I stopped by an estate sale at an old, dilapidated farmhouse. The owners of the house had passed away, and their middle-aged son was selling off its contents. I was rummaging through boxes of tools and hardware in the musty basement, not expecting to find much of interest, when a small wooden box caught my eye. It was handmade of cherry wood, aged but lovingly polished, with intricate carvings on the top. Inside lay a set of weapons' handmade knuckles, several thin black leather saps with lead shot sewn into the ends, an antique black eye, and a short ebony baton known as a shillelagh. These were most likely made and assembled by the father of the family. Perhaps they were passed down to him from his father. I envisioned men gathering around a campfire, drinking and telling stories, and these weapons being passed around and admired. I paid the man $50 for the box and contents. I usually try to resell a find like this to make a good profit, but this one I kept for myself to add to my personal collection. Something about the presence of these age-old tools of brute force and vengeance spoke to my inner turmoil. I was angry, feeling powerless to keep my marriage intact. I brought them home and hid them on a high closet shelf. Just knowing they were there brought me comfort. That night at dinner, the conversation turned again to the familiar subject of Marcus Wolf, about how he had invited Karen and some others in her department to dinner to celebrate the new contract they had negotiated. I made the mistake of noting that it was strange for someone so new to socialize with lower-level employees. Karen took umbrage, and we had our first full-blown argument in a while. There was an uproar, tears were shed, and accusations of jealousy and controlling behavior were hurled at me. I stormed out of the kitchen, and Karen retreated to the bedroom, slamming the door loud enough to shake the whole house. I poured myself a stiff drink and collapsed on the living room couch, emotionally drained. It was clear that Karen was manipulating and seducing this Wolf character for her own purposes, but saying so would only exacerbate the rift between us. I had to figure out how to prove the truth to Karen and protect her from this predator at the same time. That's when the idea first occurred to me. Confront this guy directly. Talk to him man to man. I suddenly thought of the gun hidden on the closet shelf. Maybe the whiskey had loosened my inhibitions, but I imagined waiting for Wolf at night when he left work, catch him alone in the parking lot, make it clear that if he continued to harass my wife, he would answer to me. Put on a little show with these antique instruments of retribution. Scare the bastard. In the clear light of day, I realized that such a reaction was unwise, not to mention illegal. But the fantasy remained in my mind, arising late at night when dark thoughts overcame me. My marriage continued to slowly deteriorate, and Wolf's shadow grew larger and larger. Rude fantasies were all I had left to have any control over the situation, until that fateful day when I followed them to the Broadmoor Hotel. My suspicions about an affair intensified in recent weeks. Karen grew more distant, staying late at the office several nights a week, often out for lunch for extended periods. Vague about her activities and evasive when I questioned, Wolf's name peppered her conversations. The final confirmation came accidentally one evening when I happened to see her open laptop while paying bills. There on the screen was an open email from Marcus, addressed to her as Sexy K, and going on about their standing Thursday lunch date at the Broadmoor. My heart clenched, reading his lewd words, promising a room had been booked for their next rendezvous. At last, incontrovertible proof of the betrayal I'd feared. My shock quickly turned to anger and hurt, followed by grudging admiration for Wolf's sheer audacity. Betting a married subordinate on Thursday afternoons, paying for a hotel room with company money no less. Son of a bitch certainly had balls. I'd give him that. But two could play this game. Time for a reckoning. If Wolf wanted to screw with my marriage, I'd screw with him. After some reconnaissance, I learned their regular Thursday ritual. Wolf would reserve a room in the early afternoon. They'd meet at the hotel restaurant for lunch, then retire upstairs for their adulterous gymnastics. Such a public venue required a disguise, so I raided my collection of old clothes and theatrical props amassed from years reselling vintage goods. Thus, I became Mr. Smith, a nondescript businessman in a dated black suit, overcoat, brown fedora, and tinted glasses. I used spirit gum to affix a fake mustache and tufts of gray hair behind my ears, rubbed some charcoal lightly on my eyebrows to darken them, spritzed myself with stale cologne from a thrift shop. An old briefcase and umbrella completed my costume. Just another busy man passing time while my wife was worrying upstairs. I finished my preparations and headed downtown. The lobby of the Broadmoor caters to well-heeled visitors with expensive tastes and expectations of privacy. As I lingered near the front desk, pretending to read a newspaper, no one gave me more than a passing glance. 30 minutes passed when I spotted my quarry entering. Karen looked striking, though clearly nervous, wearing a tight skirt and silky blouse I'd never seen before. Wolf looked cocky and self-assured, gripping her elbow, his eyes already undressing her. I followed them at a distance into the restaurant, took an empty table nearby, and ordered coffee. I kept the newspaper up to partially obscure my face. My view was obstructed, but I discerned snippets of conversation and flirtatious banter. Karen was flushed, continually brushing her hair back and leaning toward Wolf as he spoke. His hand disappeared under the tablecloth at one point. Her eyes widened and lips parted, no doubt, as he took indecent liberties under cover of the table. After 20 minutes of agonizing foreplay, Karen abruptly stood. Wolf held up a key card I could just make out across the room. Karen snatched it up and headed for the lobby. Showtime. I threw cash on my table and hurried after them. Catching up at the bank of elevators, I slowed my pace and turned my back, pretending to study a painting on the wall while waiting for my car. Out the corner of my eye, I observed Wolf hit the 5th-floor button as he tugged Karen into the elevator. His floor selection was fortuitous since my room reservation was on 10. I entered the elevator just before the doors slid closed, nodding politely at the amorous couple. Karen was too distracted to notice much. Wolf gave me a cursory glance, then resumed pawing at her. We ascended slowly, the creaks and clanks of the lift machinery echoing my escalating pulse. I watched numbers tick by, willing steel nerves and a steady hand for what must come. At the 5th floor, I reached across and blocked the door. Wolf scowled, but I held up both hands innocently. So sorry meant the 10th floor. Please, after you. Karen exited first as Wolf held the door, his eyes sweeping over me. He looked puzzled, as if trying to place me. I kept my face downcast and turned away. After they departed, I waited until the doors began closing, then suddenly jammed my arm through, springing them open violently again. I exited and moved quickly, but quietly down the hall, drawing the blackjack from my coat pocket. Approaching their room, I could hear laughter within. I stood to one side and listened. The sounds of glasses clinking, a cork popping. Then Wolf's muffled voice. "Come over here, baby." My fury boiled over. I reared back and kicked the door as hard as I could, again and again. I heard Karen scream and a loud thud inside. Wolf suddenly flung open the door, rage twisting his face. Before he could react, I brought the sap down with all my strength, striking his right wrist. Something cracked audibly, and Wolf howled in pain, dropping to his knees. I kicked the door wider and rushed in, locking it behind me. Wolf was clutching his injured hand, struggling to rise. I pushed him back down and pinned him with a knee to his chest. He took a swing at me with his good hand, which I easily blocked. I began raining blows on his face and head with the blackjack, putting my weight behind each swing. Blood spurted from his nose and mouth as he desperately tried shielding himself. After a dozen shots, I stopped, breathing heavily. Wolf had gone limp, moaning and twitching. I stood and turned my attention to Karen, who was cowering behind an overturned table, sobbing into her hands. Her sheer gown was torn and hair disheveled. She peered up at me with wide, terrified eyes. I removed the hat and glasses, letting her see my face. Realization of who I was registered as she gasped, "My God, Chris." "What? How?" I calmly replied, "We need to talk." About Wolf. And about us. I pocketed the sap and helped Karen up, motioning for her to sit on the bed. Shock rendered her speechless, but she complied. I began pacing, adrenaline and venom still coursing hot. This piece of shit needed to be taught a lesson about poaching another man's wife. Maybe now he'll think twice before preying on his staff. I kicked Wolf's thigh, drawing another groan. Karen found her voice again, quavering. "I don't understand, Chris. We were just having lunch." I whirled on her. DONYUDARELIETOME. I thundered. "Lunch? Is that what you call it? ISAWHANDSALLOVER IREADHISLE WDEMAILS. Shock and denial shifted to shame and capitulation as Karen reddened and looked down. I continued my tirade. IWARNED, why you a BOUTHIM? But you just wouldn't listen. Threw away our marriage for this piece of trash. I grabbed the bottle of champagne and dashed it against the wall, making Karen jump. Wolf began stirring more actively now, raising himself up on one elbow. I stood over him. She's my wife, asshole. MINE. You ever go near her again, I'll cripple you for life. I drew back my leg for another kick when suddenly the room phone rang. My head jerked up. Who could be calling? The front desk, maybe? Complaint about the noise? Wolf and Karen looked at each other panicked. On the 5V ring, I made a decision. I grabbed the handset and punched the speakerphone button. Yes. Hello? I made my voice low and hoarse. A woman replied, Oh, I'm terribly sorry. British accent. I must have misdialed my daughter's room. She just checked in today. I was so looking forward to surprising her. Please excuse the intrusion. I quickly responded, No problem, ma'am. Goodbye, and hung up. Crisis averted. I returned my attention to my wife and her paramour. Wolf seemed to be gathering his strength, glaring at me with defiance now. I pointed my finger at him. Mark my words, Wolf, this was just a warning. Stay away from her, or the next visit will be more permanent. I grabbed Karen's arm and pulled her toward the door. Let's go NOW. She hesitated, looking to Wolf. I tightened my grip, causing her to wince. Don't make me drag you. She stood slowly. I opened the door, and we exited to the hallway. The elevator doors stood open, empty and waiting. We hurried in silence down to the lobby. I avoided eye contact with the front desk clerk, keeping my head low under the hat brim. We passed through the lobby and across the parking lot to my car. I held the door for Karen. She balked like a reluctant child until I gave her arm a firm tug. Inside the car, I started the engine and sped out of the parking lot. Only then did I finally exhale, my heart still racing as I watched for police in the rearview mirror. We drove in silence for a while. Karen stared straight ahead, arms crossed protectively. Finally, she spoke. So, are you going to tell me where we're going? I sighed. Home. We need to talk. She shook her head forcefully. No, I can't go there. I don't think I can stay with you, Chris. Not after what you did. Her words hung between us. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel as the reality sank in. It was over between us. My temper and jealousy cost me my wife. Perhaps my very freedom if Wolf chose to press charges. I had nothing left to lose. You're right. It's over, Karen, I said quietly. It has been for a while, probably. I want you to be happy. I'm sorry things happened this way. Her face softened a bit, and she turned to look at me. I didn't plan for this, Chris. I never wanted to hurt you. I felt so alive with Marcus. He made me feel appreciated, admired. Can you understand that? I nodded slowly. I think in my own way I do understand. Just wasn't what I wanted to hear. I pulled up at the next corner outside a coffee shop. Why don't you call your mother to come get you? You can stay there a while until we get things figured out. Karen considered this, then opened her door to make the call. Karen ended her call with Chris and sat numbly holding the dead phone. Her mind reeled, struggling to process the shocking events just witnessed. The hotel room door still hung open, a trail of blood visible on the carpet where her lover Jonathan had lain battered and moaning. She trembled at the memory. What kind of cold-hearted bastard could inflict such brutality on another human being? Karen felt gutted by wave after wave of emotion, disbelief, sorrow, guilt, shame. She and Jonathan had been intimate for almost 6 months now. He was an outside consultant who visited her Philadelphia office periodically to provide sales training and review proposals. There was an instant attraction between them from his first visit. Harmless flirtation at first, stolen glances across conference rooms, inside jokes whispered in the hallway. Karen still loved Chris in her own way and had never been unfaithful in over 20 years of marriage. But with Chris immersed in his antique business and emotionally withdrawn at home, she found herself craving attention, conversation, and laughter again. Jonathan was smart, charming, a world traveler full of exciting stories. He made her feel appreciated and cared for during their talks. His adoring looks conveyed more than words could say. They might have left things platonic if not for one late night working together, reviewing an RFP response. Chinese takeout cartons and paperwork were scattered across the conference room. Karen stood peering over Jonathan's shoulder at some graphs on his laptop. She wore a silk blouse that gaped open as she leaned forward. Jonathan froze, staring down her top at the lacy bra barely constraining her breasts. Karen smiled, enjoying his obvious arousal and admiration. In a husky voice, she teased, "See something interesting down there?" Jonathan gulped, reddening. Sorry, I didn't mean to." She touched his shoulder gently. "It's okay, Jonathan." "I'm flattered." "It's nice feeling attractive to a man again." He turned to face her, eyes dark with desire. "Karen, you have no idea how maddeningly sexy I find you. But as much as I want you, I respect your marriage too much to cross that line." In that charged moment, all her latent longing and loneliness surfaced. She took Jonathan's hand and guided it inside her blouse to cup her breasts. "What if I want you to cross that line?" she whispered. They came together hungrily, urgently, swept away by pent-up passion too long denied. Right there, they made love on the conference table amid the clutter of their work. It was the first time she had ever been unfaithful to Chris. Certainly not the last with Jonathan. They managed to keep things very discreet, stealing time together when he was in town. Karen justified her behavior by telling herself Chris had long ago stopped meeting her needs at home. She was owed a little happiness, and as long as Chris never found out, what harm was done? She convinced Jonathan to get a room at the Broadmoor for their trysts, allowing more time than his cramped hotel near the office. This Thursday was to be a final stolen moment before Jonathan left town again. Their waiter had just delivered champagne when a horrific crashing at the door made Karen scream. She barely registered Jonathan opening the door when a dark figure burst in, striking him savagely. Karen scrambled behind a table, watching in horror as the assailant rained blow after blow down on Jonathan's unprotected head and body. He dropped limply to the floor, blood pooling under his face. The shock of seeing Chris revealed as the attacker jolted her system even more. His venomous rant confirmed her worst fears. Chris had discovered her affair and retaliated with unrestrained violence. She cringed under his verbal abuse, flinching when he smashed the champagne bottle. His iron grip on her arm reinforced his complete physical domination of the situation. When Chris received the fateful misdialed call, Karen sagged in relief, praying it would make him leave. But instead, he chose to end the attack and flee, dragging her forcibly along. His next words chilled her soul. "Let's go. Eno W." Where was he taking her? For more private abuse? Even murder? She shuddered considering Chris might actually kill the witness Jonathan if discovered here battered and bleeding. The shrill ring of her cell phone jarred Karen back to the present. Caller ID displayed Mom's cell. She hesitated, swiping at tears, trying to compose herself before answering. "Hi, Mom." She managed to choke out. "Karen? What on earth is wrong?" "You sound awful," came the concerned reply. Despite herself, Karen broke down sobbing into the phone. Alarmed, her mom insisted on coming right over to fetch her. Karen didn't know what else to do, so she agreed, asking her mom to hurry. She hung up feeling she had to get back upstairs immediately. What if Chris returned to finish Jonathan off? She had to check on him, get hotel security up there, do something. Barely able to walk at first, she pushed herself erect. Her back screamed in protest after being wrenched in the earlier struggle with Chris and then Jonathan's dead weight. Hobbling to the elevator, she stabbed repeatedly at the 5th-floor button. Come on, damn it. The slow-moving car finally arrived, and she squeezed inside a departing couple to begin the ascent. Reaching the correct floor, Karen rushed headlong down the hall, calling Jonathan's name. To her immense relief, she found him sitting slumped against the wall right outside their room, conscious but dazed. At her exclamation, he raised his swollen, bloody face and burst into pathetic tears. She helped him back inside the room and onto the bed, assuring him the police were on the way. She winced seeing his mangled hand, possibly broken. Jonathan faded out again, so Karen grabbed the bedside phone to call the front desk. But the line was dead. Chris had ripped it from the wall socket during his rampage. Cursing helplessly, Karen ran back into the hall, hoping to find a house phone. Instead, she encountered a hotel security guard approaching, alerted by guests to the prior disturbance. One look at Jonathan's battered form sent the guard racing back to the lobby to summon police. Karen awoke late the next morning, body and soul aching. She lay still, yesterday's traumatic events flooding back. The shock of Chris's savage hotel room assault on her lover Jonathan. Being dragged from the aftermath against her will. Returning home to find Chris bizarrely composed given the circumstances. As morning sun peeked around the bedroom curtains, Karen cringed, remembering the police would be wanting to speak with her again. And dear God, what if they contacted the office about her and Jonathan? Risky enough having a workplace affair without assault and scandal being splashed around. She dreaded trying to explain it all away to her skeptical husband too. Karen dressed hurriedly, wincing as pain knifed through her wrenched back. She cracked the bedroom door and peered out. No sign of Chris. In the kitchen, she discovered a note saying he had errands to run, but would be back by noon to talk. Perfect, she needed to get to Jonathan right away. Karen called a taxi and headed downtown, each bump in the road agonizing to her injuries. At Jonathan's hotel, she found him looking even worse than the previous night. Both eyes were swollen nearly shut, his split lips grotesquely puffy. An IV drip was attached to one heavily bandaged arm. Her heart broke, seeing his battered state, yet he managed a relieved smile when she entered. My angel, you came. Jonathan rasped in a slurred voice. She rushed to him, embracing gently, tears flowing again. Oh, Jonathan, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. Jonathan shushed her protests. No, don't think that way. Please, just lay here by me. He patted the bed weakly. Karen eased onto her side, facing him. She lightly traced the one unbandaged section of his cheek with her fingers, comforting him as they talked. Jonathan, listen. The police spoke with me last night. I didn't give them any details about us or why we were there. I said you were a coworker, and I had no idea who attacked you or why. Jonathan nodded slightly. I told them the same. Figured it was best to keep private things private. But when I'm feeling stronger, we need to talk about this bastard. I think I may know who arranged this. Karen swallowed hard. She had to handle this delicately or risk Jonathan going to the police. I was terrified, Jonathan. I feel just awful. You got hurt because of me. Maybe it's a sign we shouldn't be sneaking around anymore. If Chris ever found out. Jonathan waved his good hand weakly. No, I don't accept that. I finally found you. Someone I truly care for, Karen. I'll be damned if some thug tries to scare me off. Karen dabbed gently at his brow with a tissue. Shh. Try to rest, darling. We'll figure this out. I should go soon, though. Chris will be wondering where I am. Jonathan's one functioning eye flew open. You went home to HIM last night? After what he did to us. Karen squeezed his hand reassuringly. I had no choice. He forced me into his car, said we had to talk. I couldn't exactly refuse after. Well, after what happened? Jonathan looked incredulous. But Karen, why protect someone who nearly killed me? Someone capable of such violence? She stroked his hair softly. I know. I was terrified too. But the man I've known for over 20 years wasn't in that room. Someone else was. Maybe he just snapped. I have to try talking to him. Give him a chance to explain. Jonathan still seemed skeptical. I hope you know what you're doing, love. Don't be afraid to call the police if you feel threatened again. I intend to pursue this once I'm healed up. He's going to face charges for what he did. Karen leaned in and kissed him tenderly. Let's just take things one day at a time, sweetheart. I should go. Jonathan clung to her hand weakly. Will you come again tomorrow, before I fly home? She smiled. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. Now rest. Karen slipped out the door, heart in turmoil again. She believed Chris had only reacted in rage to her betrayal. She couldn't stand the thought of him in prison or Jonathan being attacked again. The whole mess had to be sorted without police involvement or publicity. But how? Arriving home, Karen steeled herself for confrontation. But Chris greeted her cordially, even sympathetically, as if the previous 24 hours hadn't occurred. He inquired politely about her injuries and need for any medical care. Asked if she'd eaten, offered to make her eggs. She finally lashed out in exasperation. Please stop it, Chris. Stop acting like everything's normal. After what you did, I just can't cope with this pretend politeness. Chris raised his palms in a calming gesture and guided her to the living room sofa. You're absolutely right. We need to discuss this openly. Karen, I owe you an enormous apology. I handled things completely wrong, and you have every right to be upset with me. I never should have laid a hand on Jonathan, no matter what the provocation. And I'm so very sorry for forcing you to leave the hotel with me. That couldn't have helped your state of mind. Karen looked askance, processing his words as he continued. Most importantly, I realize I really lost control when I saw you with another man. It brought out this primitive rage I didn't know I had in me. Maybe it was a blessing for me to finally confront that darkness. He reached for her hand tentatively. I don't expect your forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm going to get counseling. Try to work through my issues. You deserve the chance to move on and be happy. His sincerity caught Karen off guard. She had steeled herself for more volatility. I don't know what to say, Chris. I appreciate you apologizing. As far as moving on, I need time to think. Everything is such a mess right now. Fresh tears threatened, and Chris wordlessly handed her the tissue box. You don't need to decide anything yet, he said gently. Why don't I draw you a hot bath while I make us some lunch? Karen managed a tremulous smile at his thoughtfulness. Thank you, sweetheart. I am hungry, and a soak would feel lovely. Chris smiled back, coming right up. As he headed upstairs, Karen felt the tiniest flicker of hope. Maybe they could somehow find their way through this crisis after all. Over the next week, a delicate detense took hold between them. Chris was solicitous and attentive to Karen's needs as she continued recovering. He resumed his hobby outings, but always checked in by phone. Karen visited Jonathan twice more before he flew home. Chris made no objections when she said she was going out. She kept the conversations light, not mentioning the attack or their relationship. 10 days later, Karen announced over dinner that she would be staying late on a special work project. Chris just nodded, expressing hope her back pain was improving. It still hurt, but Karen managed fine. She felt optimistic about progress with Chris, while enjoying Jonathan's increasingly amorous emails promising sensual delights on his upcoming visit. She had come to realize something had to give between the two men, but postponing that decision was possible for now. Or so she believed. The crisis point came unexpectedly on a Saturday afternoon. Karen was cleaning up after lunch when the doorbell rang. She opened it to find two stern-looking police detectives. They apologized for disturbing her weekend, but had a few follow-up questions about the assault on her coworker at the Broadmoor Hotel. Karen hesitated, then reluctantly let them inside, nerves jangling. The detectives settled onto the living room sofa. Karen perched anxiously on a chair facing them. "Mrs. Henderson, we originally accepted your statements about the attack on Mr. Lamb. However, some new information has come to light that doesn't fully match your account." Karen stiffened. "New information? I told you everything I know about that awful day." The first detective flipped open his notebook. "We finally got access to the hotel's security camera footage. It was recorded over, but we recovered enough fragments to piece together some of what occurred in that elevator and the 5th floor hallway." Karen paled but said nothing. His partner spoke up. "We don't have clear images due to camera angles and obstructions, but the footage and shadows suggest you and Mr. Lamb exited the elevator together with a third individual. This person appears to attack Mr. Lamb immediately after, then exits alone with you a short time later." Karen's pulse raced. She struggled to keep her voice steady. I told you. I didn't see who attacked him. It must have happened after I left the elevator." The detectives exchanged a glance. The first one leaned forward. "With respect, ma'am, we have reason to believe this third person was your husband." Karen shot to her feet. "That's absurd. Why on earth would you think Chris was involved?" The second detective stood abruptly. "Because the assailant matches his physical profile. And we received an anonymous call from someone who claims to have spotted Mr. Henderson at the hotel that same day." Shock and rage battled inside Karen. Chris must have bragged about his crime. She had to do damage control quickly. Summoning all her poise, she addressed the detectives politely but firmly. "Gentlemen, I can personally assure you neither I nor Mr. Lamb had any contact with my husband at the Broadmoor. While I appreciate you following up leads, I'm afraid this one is a dead end. Now, if there's nothing else." The detectives exchanged another glance. Then the first man replied, "Very well, we'll pursue other angles. But do tell your husband we'd like a quick word to eliminate him from suspicion." Heart pounding, Karen showed them out the door. After they left, she stood trembling. Chris had gone too far. She had to act decisively, or they could both end up in jail.